How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Lorbeck Luxury Cars Friday Drive. Now, this week is something a little bit different for me from the usual supercar theme, but it's basically a supercar at its origin, the Audi RSQ8. First up, I want to talk about the exterior styling before we head into the interior. Now, the first thing that hits you is this big front grille, and it's not quite BMW-esque where it's too big, but I love the styling of these things. We've got our wrap on both sides here, so we've got the carbon hood and the roofing, and then we've got this green. I don't even know what color we'd call it, but it's kind of throwing me like British Racing Green vibes in certain lights, which I quite like. Got these like slimline headlights, and I'm going to work my way around the car a little bit, but got massive 23-inch rims, which make it look so tough on the road. Working our way to the rear of the car now, and the first thing that strikes me is just the general body shape of the car. We've got a few accents for the RS model, but it almost just looks like a fat R8, just raised up and a bit bigger. I love the look of these things. And one thing that's really important, that sort of very classic oval shaped exhaust on either side is so Audi. It's almost like the four rings, but used as the exhaust pipes there. We're going to talk a little bit about the interior now, and one thing that I really like about Audis is that everything is very simple. It's not overcomplicated, and every little thing that you try and use, it makes it easy for the user to access, right? So we've got our speed control here, cruise control, which is really simple. I quite like how it's not on the wheel because it's not something we use all the time. So it frees up a bit of space for some other controls to be able to navigate the dash here, our RS button, which we'll go through in a bit more detail on the drive. You can see next to me, we've got soft touch leather. We've got this Alcantara finish. We've got the interior blue lighting, which I quite like, which is interchangeable. And then the carbon finish kind of wraps around everywhere, I've noticed on the car, which I really like. And then you've got the big RS seats at the back here with that red stitching, sort of like with the honeycomb finish on there, and the RS at the back. And there's something about RS models that you look at an RS6, an RS3, or the RSQ8, they're tough, they're mean, they're stylish, they're incredibly impressive performance, but also super comfortable and luxury, and that's something that I really like about them. This is one of my favorite cars that I've driven. It's sort of one of those performance SUVs, if you will, and it's basically a Urus, but maybe better, we'll see. Now we're into the driving element. Now, I've been very lucky enough to have driven these cars on the track a lot, and the sort of performance you can get out of them. These are the cars that Audi use as their lead vehicles when doing lapping on their Audi drive events. Now, you imagine you've got a whole bunch of RS6s behind you, and some of the faster customers that we have on those events can't keep up with one of us driving one of these things. And it's not because we're that much better, because some of the customers we get are very capable behind the wheel, but it shows how good this car is. And we have probably 4 up in the car at the same time as people are learning, understanding the essence of driving on a track. And people are always astonished at how impressive these things are for such a big vehicle. You know, for an SUV, how fast and how capable, how compliant they are on the circuit. Now, the engine, 3-litre V8, produces just under 600 horsepower and 800 Newton meters of torque. One of the really impressive things I find with that is you've got that much power going through the wheels. Now, it's quattro, it's all drive, but typically, as we're driving now, it's about a 60-40 split, which is quite common for a lot of vehicles. But as we drive faster, we change the modes. As we start to really progress in how quickly we're driving the vehicle, it ends up being an 80-20 split, 80 to the rear, 20 to the front. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so capable on track, is that it doesn't have this sort of equal balance where the front's trying to drive it around the corner, where it does feel a little bit like the front's dragging a little bit, which I personally don't like. Whereas because it shifts so much of that power to the rear wheels, like a traditional rear-wheel drive car, you hardly notice that the front wheels are really doing anything, but it's just there to help. At the moment, we're just driving normally. I'm in just normal drive mode. I've not changed anything, and it's super comfortable. We're just cruising along the beach road here, and it's simple, it's easy. The steering wheel is nice and light. I just feel like I'm comfortable. We've got all the tech that we can really ask for. This one's got a head-up display, which I'm a huge fan of. I think every car should have it. It's fantastic. Keeps your eyes up on the road rather than having to physically look down. You're taking your eyes off the road. Other than that, we've got our big screen here. All the gear with this. You got phone apps. You got one thing I want to have a little scroll through is the car settings. So go into our drive select here. So at the moment we're in dynamic. We can go all-road, we can go our efficiency, we've got comfort, auto, and our off-road mode as well. And similar to our chat last week about the G-Wagon, the G-Wagon's a different beast in itself with the off-road, but at the end of the day, this is still an SUV. You can also change your RS modes. So if you want to keep it all dynamic, you can change that. So the steering in RS1, I can change it to constantly be dynamic. I can change the engine sound. I can change the Quattro with the sport differential. So that dynamic sport differential is what we're talking about. That's the one that gets us to 80% rear, 20% front drive. Whereas if I want to change it, I can change that split basically as in how I want it. So let's say RS1 I have for a certain type of driving that I'm doing every day, and then I can change to RS2, which does put the traction into sport. Doesn't take it all the way off, it's still there to help. But ESC Sport is something that it's almost like the really clever little German engineers in the car, they've gone home for a bit, but they're there just in case. They've gone for a smoke break, if you will. Whereas ESC all the way off, that's when all the fun happens. And we can't do it on the road, but I've taken one of these things on a skid pan, and let me tell you how much fun one of these things is on a skid pan, and you can really feel that 80-20 split as you're doing that, because it's actually really easy to get these things to go sideways in that moment. Now, we do it in a controlled environment, we can't do it on the road, but it just highlights the capabilities of the car, and that customizability that we have is really, really good. And same as RS2, you can see we can change that as well. One thing that's really noticeable in the RSQ8 is how much of its DNA it is shared with the RS6, the RS5, and all the RS models. The way I feel in the car is the same, the steering wheel. The one thing that I like to comment on Audis is how adjustable these cars are. So I like the steering wheel really close to me, but if you're somebody with longer arms, you can see how far back this thing actually goes. But then someone like me, I like to have, well, there is a correct way of sitting in a car, and maybe one day we'll go through it, but you see how much of a bend I have in my arms, where as I turn, I still have a bend in them. The other thing is the comfortability as I have my hands at 9 and 3. Now, we all get taught to have our hands at 10 and 2, but that's actually not correct. If you've ever seen a Formula 1 steering wheel, you don't see Lewis Hamilton holding his hands up here, do you? He physically can't. Those little indents are really nicely placed. You've got obviously the RS little signification here as well, and these buttons, I like how it's all analog. You can actually feel the button pressing. It's not necessarily, sometimes those haptic feels aren't the best on the wheel, because they get used so much that they end up becoming a little bit awkward, or it doesn't quite do what you want it to do. But I love how it's just really analog. You feel every little thing with each input that you make. And the customizability on the front screen here, you can have our navigation, we've got our phone systems, we've got our Bluetooth, and then the information about the car. We've got our G sensors and all those different things, tire pressure monitoring. And I like having all of that there, particularly when I'm doing the track stuff, because you can understand how the front tire, the rear tire is actually working, particularly the front tire because of the weight. Having that information there for me is really, really important. So I can look after the tire as we're going around the circuit as well. A lot of people say that the Urus is basically an RSQ8. Now, in essence, that is absolutely true. They share the same DNA. Well, I mean, Lamborghini are owned by VAG Group, much like Audi are, and Volkswagen, and a number of other brands like Bentley. But that's for very good reason. It's because they build really, really good cars. And if you actually just sit in an Urus and sit in an Audi RSQ8 like we are now, you would see that they are actually vastly different. But I think that it's a good thing that it shares that DNA, because if it's good enough for Lamborghini and their expectations, well, Audi should be really, really happy about that. It shows how good this car really is. I've loved it. Check out our videos, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, make sure you follow us on Instagram, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.